Every single step you take today is, it's actually sending this microscopic bolt of electricity directly into your skeleton.
Yeah, which is wild because you don't feel it at all.
Right, you don't feel it. But right now, the sheer mechanical force of your foot just hitting the floor is physically deforming the mineral structure of your bones. And that generates a voltage that commands your cells to basically rebuild your body from the inside out.
Exactly. I mean, the human skeleton is not this static, dead architectural frame. It is a highly communicative, just violently active biological engineering project.
Yeah, and that totally flips the traditional idea of a broken bone healing, right? Like we usually picture gluing a shattered teacup back together, putting it on a shelf and just waiting for it to dry.
Which is a complete misunderstanding of our biomechanics. Time alone does not heal bone. I mean, force, electricity, and neurological rewiring do.
And that is exactly our mission for this deep dive. We are taking this stack of honestly fascinating medical, biomechanical, and neurological texts, and we're going to decode the real-time integration of how the human body heals its physical hardware.
Right, while simultaneously rewiring its software.
Exactly. So whether you are, currently recovering from an injury, training for a sport, or just insanely curious about the hidden physics of your own body, the mechanics we're going to explore here will completely alter how you view a simple walk around the block.
It really changes your perspective.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because the sources really anchor this whole process around two parallel tracks of recovery, right? The hiking trail and the cold welt.
Yeah, so the hiking trail represents neuroplasticity. That's your software. It's basically the communication network in your motor cortex learning how to coordinate movement through injured tissue.
Okay, so the brain figuring out how to navigate the damage.
Exactly. And then the cold welt is the bone remodeling. So that's the physical hardware repair happening at the microscopic site of the fracture.
Right. And the bridge between that software and hardware is where that microscopic bolt of electricity comes in. Because the texts refer to the bone itself as a biological battery operating on the piezoelectric effect.
Yes, the piezoelectric effect, which sounds super sci-fi.
It really does. Like, I know piezoelectricity from things like push-button lighters, where you strike a crystal and it creates a spark.
Yeah.
But applying that to human bone implies our skeleton is essentially this network of electrical generators.
Well, the underlying physics are actually identical. I mean, bone is a composite material. It's made of these flexible collagen fibers embedded with rigid hydroxyapatite crystals.
Which are basically just calcium and phosphate, right?
Right. So when you compress a bone by bearing weight, or even when a muscle forcefully pulls on it, you physically deform those crystals, and that mechanical deformation shifts the positive and negative electrical charges inside the crystal lattice.
Wow. So it creates a tiny electrical charge.
Exactly. It creates a dipole moment. You generate a microvoltage.
Yeah. So here's where it gets really interesting for me. Does this mean the mechanical impact of walking is instantly converted into an electrical current?
Yep. Instantly.
Which means the body doesn't just, sense weight in some abstract, vague way. The electricity is a localized, targeted text message.
That's a great way to put it. It's traveling directly to the osteoblasts. Those are the cellular construction workers that build new bones, saying, hey, we're taking heavy structural loads at these exact coordinates, reinforce the scaffolding right here.
That is mind-blowing.
It really is.
Yeah.
The voltage literally opens calcium channels on the membranes of those osteoblasts, pulling them out of their dormant state. Without that electrical depolarization, the builder cells just remain completely asleep.
Wow. Okay. And this biological reality forms the basis of Wolff's Law, right? The principle that bone adapts precisely to the loads placed upon it.
Exactly. Form follows function. Or form follows fluid dynamics, to be highly specific.
Oh, wait, fluid dynamics? How does fluid play into this?
Well, inside your bones, there's this microscopic network of canals filled with fluid. When you walk, the bending of the bone forces that fluid through the canals, and the osteocytes, the sensor cells inside the bone, detect the shear stress of that fluid moving. They translate that fluid stress into biochemical signals that tell the osteoblasts to lay down new bone along the exact lines of force.
Okay, but wait, I have to challenge this based on what almost every medical professional tells you when you get hurt.
Uh-oh, here we go.
No, seriously. When I broke my wrist a few years ago, the ER doctor put me in a rigid cast and gave me strict instructions not to lift a single thing. I was supposed to completely immobilize it.
Right. Total rest.
Yeah. But if Wolff's Law requires mechanical load to generate the electricity that wakes up the builder cells, keeping an injury perfectly still, still seems like the exact opposite of what the biology actually needs.
Well, you're hitting on the core paradox of orthopedic therapy here. There is a critical distinction between primary stability and secondary healing.
Here, break that down for me.
So in the immediate aftermath of a violent trauma, you need primary stability. So you don't, sever an artery or destroy the initial fragile tissue cascade. You need things to just sit still for a minute.
Right, that makes sense. You don't want a jagged bone cutting something important.
Exactly. But prolonged total rest is genuinely detrimental. Your body is the ultimate biological economist. If a limb is immobilized and generating zero piezoelectric current, the body assumes that heavy, energy-expensive bone is completely obsolete.
Oh, wow. So it just stops maintaining it.
Worse than that, it initiates osteopenia. It uses osteoclasts to actively break down the minerals and ship them elsewhere to be used.
So the art of recovery is finding the exact threshold of constructive constraint. Like, you have to introduce enough micro-movement to trigger the biological battery, but not so much mechanical stress that you disrupt the physical bridge trying to form across the fracture.
You nailed it.
It's almost like forging metal versus letting a puddle dry. If you just let a puddle dry without touching it, it just sits there.
Okay.
But if you don't strike the metal, if you don't introduce vibration and a progressive force, the weld sets poorly and stays totally porous, like a dry sponge.
Exactly. The force aligns the internal fibers. And to understand how the body manages that delicate transition from a fragile state to a rigid, forged structure, the texts outline the 4 biological phases of consolidation.
Right, the actual construction site timeline.
Yeah, and it's a highly sequenced project that begins the literal millisecond the bone snaps.
Okay, so the first phase is inflammation, which, usually gets a bad reputation. Like, we ice things and take huge doses of ibuprofen to stop inflammation.
We do, but looking at the cellular mechanics here, the hematoma, the pooling of blood at the fracture site, isn't just random swelling. It's a highly sophisticated biochemical signaling environment.
The texts basically call it the foundational blueprint, right?
Yes. The severing of blood vessels creates a localized state of hypoxia, which is a severe lack of oxygen. And that oxygen deprivation triggers the release of vascular endothelial growth factor, commanding the body to aggressively build new blood vessels.
Wow, so the lack of oxygen is actually the alarm bell?
Right. And simultaneously, macrophages flood the zone. They aren't just like sweeping away dead bone debris. They are actively releasing cytokines that summon the stem cells necessary for the next phase.
So if you aggressively suppress that initial inflammation with heavy doses of NSAIDs, you're potentially silencing the alarm bells that tell the stem cells where to go.
Exactly. You're turning off the signal.
Which brings us to phase 2, the soft callus. So the stem cells arrive, but they don't immediately start building hard bone.
No, that would be a disaster. They lay down a cartilaginous matrix heavily reliant on type 2 collagen. It creates this rubbery, flexible bridge across the gap.
Oh, like pouring wet cement or maybe using wood glue.
Mm-hmm.
It holds the pieces together, but if you drive a heavy truck over it right away, the whole bridge just collapses.
Exactly. The biomechanical brilliance of that rubbery bridge is that it neutralizes shear forces. The body knows the fracture environment is unstable.
Right, because if it tried to build brittle, calcified bone right away, the absolute slightest twisting motion would shatter it.
Right. The soft callus acts as a biological shock absorber. It holds the 2 fragments together while still allowing for the tiny micro-movements necessary to generate those piezoelectric signals we talked about.
Ah, that perfectly explains the transition to phase 3, the hard callus. Once the rubber bridge has stabilized the environment, the osteoblasts finally have a safe scaffold to work on.
Yep. And they switch from type 2 collagen to type 1 and start precipitating calcium and phosphate to form rigid crystals.
And this is where the biological battery really flips on, right? Like, weeks 4 through 12, the weight of the hikers, your body weight, tells the minerals exactly where to deposit.
Yes, but the architecture laid down here is still really chaotic. It's this bulky, spongy mass designed for rapid stabilization, not long-term efficiency.
Which necessitates phase 4, remodeling.
The long game!
Right, the body acting as a sculptor. Shaving off the excess weld over months or years, turning that spongy bone into solid, compact bone that perfectly matches the lines of physical force.
And they do this strictly according to the electrical lines of force you generate.
Okay, so all of this describes the natural, uninterrupted sequence. But there are obviously limits to that soft callus bridge. Like, what happens when the ravine is simply too wide for the body's natural glue to cross on its own?
Well, that's where osteosynthesis comes in, the introduction of external hardware.
You mean like titanium plates, intramedullary nails, and screws. Surgery, basically.
Right. But the crucial misconception the medical sources highlight here is the role of that metal. A titanium plate does absolutely zero healing.
Wait, really? None.
None.
Yeah.
It contains no biology, it generates no stem cells.
So the plate is purely a mechanical bypass. It acts as a scaffolding, taking the bending and twisting loads off the fragile biological bridge.
Exactly. By bolting a rigid strut across the fracture, you neutralize the destructive shear forces. The real advantage isn't that the metal heals the bone, it's that the metal allows the patient to safely bear weight.
So you can turn on the biological battery weeks earlier than you could if you were relying solely on nature.
Precisely. The hardware protects the construction site from catastrophic collapse, but the cells still have to physically cross the gap.
And what happens when they fail to cross that gap?
Yeah.
Because that definitely happens.
It does. When the cells fail, we encounter a condition called pseudarthrosis, which basically translates to a false joint.
The failed weld.
Right. The weld fails, the bone never hardens, and the fracture site remains permanently mobile, which is incredibly painful.
Looking at the mechanics from the sources, there seem to be three distinct ways to cause a pseudarthrosis. The first one is just a lack of signal, like hypoactivity.
Yeah, stress shielding.
Yeah.
If the hardware is so rigid or the patient is so completely immobilized that absolutely zero mechanical strain reaches the bone, the piezoelectric effect never happens.
The battery stays dead, the osteoblasts never get the text message, so they just pack up and leave.
Exactly. And the metal takes 100% of the load, so the bone underneath it demineralizes.
Okay, what's the second cause?
The exact opposite. Too much mechanical instability.
Oh, so the bridge shakes too much.
Right. If the fixation is loose, or the patient ignores weight-bearing protocols and walks heavily on a soft callus, the excessive shear forces constantly tear the newly forming capillaries and collagen fibers apart.
So the bridge is repeatedly destroyed before it can even mineralize. That sounds awful. And the third failure point isn't mechanical at all, right? It's a breakdown in the supply chain.
Exactly. You can have the perfect amount of stress in a stable environment, but if the raw materials aren't available, construction halts.
The texts heavily emphasize the destructive role of smoking in this process, which, I mean, we all know smoking is bad, but the mechanism here is wild.
It really is. Nicotine binds to receptors in the blood vessels, causing severe vasoconstriction. It literally clamps the pipe shut, starving the fracture site of the oxygen and nutrients needed for ATP production.
And ATP is the cellular energy required to actually build the bone.
Right. Plus, carbon monoxide from the smoke binds to hemoglobin much more aggressively than oxygen does, further suffocating the tissue.
So if you combine smoking with, say, a lack of vitamin D, which you need to absorb calcium, the osteoblasts simply don't have the physical mortar to pour into the collagen matrix.
They're showing up to work with no bricks.
That is such a vivid picture, and it brings up a really fascinating dynamic in the clinical setting. A patient goes in at week 6, the doctor takes an x-ray, sees a cloudy mass of hard callus bridging the gap, and says, great, you are cleared to walk.
Right, the green light.
But we tend to view that x-ray as proof that the bone is fully healed and strong. But the expert texts clarify that the imaging is just showing volume, not density.
What's fascinating here is how doctors decide when you can walk. The X-ray is simply the green light indicating structural continuity. It proves the bridge won't collapse under static load. But the X-ray does not give the bone its tensile strength.
The actual act of walking does.
Exactly, and it's not about the sheer magnitude of the weight. It's not about standing on the leg once a week and pressing 100 pounds into it.
It's about the cyclical loading, the frequency.
Yes. The thousands of small, repetitive steps. The frequency of the mechanical strain prevents cellular accommodation.
Wait, accommodation, like they get bored?
Basically, if you just apply constant static pressure, the osteocytes get used to it and stop firing electrical signals. But the rhythmic, cyclical impact of 1,000 footsteps constantly depolarizes the cells,
forcing them to relentlessly drive calcium into the matrix, packing the structural density tighter and tighter.
Exactly.
Okay, so taking this from the microscopic level of the fracture up to the macro architecture of the body, we really have to look at the concept of tensegrity, tension and integrity.
This is one of my favorite concepts.
It's so cool. We usually conceptualize the human skeleton as a stack of bricks, right? The skull resting on the spine, the pelvis resting on the femurs, gravity pushing straight down.
But the biomechanical reality is much closer to like a sailboat.
Right, a continuous tension network. Your bones are essentially rigid compression struts floating inside a massive elastic web of fascia, tendons, and muscles,
The bones don't even really touch each other. They are suspended in this tensegrity matrix.
which fundamentally changes the physics of how that newly welded bone experiences force. Like, think about it.
Yeah.
If you've been limping for 6 weeks, or your leg has been locked in a brace, the fascial cables in your calf and hamstring become glued down, dehydrated, and incredibly tight.
Yep. And when you finally try to walk, that tightened rigging exerts an asymmetrical pull on the bone.
So the mechanical force doesn't travel cleanly down the vertical axis. It pulls the new vulnerable weld completely crooked.
Then remember the electrical signals we discussed earlier. The piezoelectric currents are directed by the vectors of mechanical force.
Oh, wow. So if abnormal tension bends the bone in the wrong direction, the osteoblasts will lay down the remodeling architecture along that crooked line.
Exactly. You cannot achieve a biomechanically sound cold weld if the tensegrity of the surrounding soft tissue is distorted.
So physical rehabilitation isn't just about making the fracture site strong. It's about rehydrating the fascial web so the tension lines are balanced across the entire hull of the ship.
Exactly. But here is the piece of the puzzle that completely reframes the timeline of recovery.
Okay, hit me.
We've established that daytime is for gathering data, taking steps, generating electrical current, directing the fluid shear stress. But the actual physical construction, the pouring of the concrete, does not happen while you are walking.
Right, so when does the actual building happen?
It is entirely governed by chronobiology, the night shift. The metabolic demands of moving your body, digesting food, and processing sensory input are immense. During the day, your system simply does not have the surplus ATP to dedicate to massive tissue regeneration.
So the daytime effort on the hiking trail is basically just drawing the blueprint. The workers don't actually show up until you go to sleep.
Exactly. The absolute peak of protein synthesis occurs during the deepest stages of non-REM sleep.
Wow.
This is when the pituitary gland releases the largest surge of human growth hormone. Your body downregulates cortisol, and melatonin actually suppresses the bone-destroying osteoclasts while stimulating the bone-building osteoblasts.
That is incredible. So if you are aggressively doing your physical therapy, generating all the perfect mechanical signals, but you are chronically sleep deprived,
The blueprint is never executed.
the daytime signals just fade away because the physiological environment required to engrave them into your physical structure never arrives.
Healing is fundamentally dependent on the circadian rhythm. And the brain's involvement during that deep rest isn't limited to just hormone release either.
Right. This brings us back to the concept of the global brain and the hiking trail, because healing isn't just mechanical, it's a neuromechano-biological event.
Exactly. Because to walk correctly on that newly healed bone, you don't just need bone density, you need motor control.
And tracing that new neurological hiking trail requires the active participation of the limbic system, right? The emotional and motivational center of the brain. The sources highlight that dopamine actually plays a massive role in physical healing.
Which is wild because we usually just associate dopamine with reward or pleasure.
It's true. Dopamine actively lowers the threshold required for long-term potentiation in your synapses.
Meaning it makes it easier to learn a movement.
Right. When a patient is emotionally engaged, highly motivated, and truly focused on the precision of their movement during rehab, the limbic system floods the motor cortex with dopamine.
And that neurochemical environment allows the brain to wire the new movement patterns significantly faster and with more permanence than if you were just mindlessly going through the motions.
Or doing them with a sense of defeat. The intent behind the movement physically alters the speed of the neurological rewiring. And it's not just the motor cortex and the limbic system. The brain is also utilizing the visual cortex and the vestibular system in your inner ear as like an internal GPS.
Yes. As the bone remodels, it requires precise spatial coordinates. Your eyes and your inner ear constantly triangulate your position relative to gravity.
So they feed that data down the spinal cord, adjusting the muscular tension in the tensegrity network millisecond by millisecond.
Exactly, ensuring the bone aligns perfectly with the gravitational forces of the earth.
Wow. Okay, so what does this all mean? Synthesizing all of this, the piezoelectric deformation of the crystals, the fluid shear stress of Wolff's law, the balancing of the tensegrity network, the hormonal night shift of deep sleep, and the dopamine-driven rewiring of the motor cortex. It points to one staggering conclusion.
Everything is connected.
Exactly. The physical bone, the hard white material we view in an X-ray, is completely subservient to the vast, integrated intelligence of the living system operating it.
A skeleton just cannot heal in isolation. I mean, you cannot separate the mind's intent, the quality of the sleep cycle, or the tension of the fascia from the ultimate structural density of the bone. It is an active, whole system negotiation.
So as we close out this deep dive, the next time you take a simple walk around the block, I want you to picture the physics occurring beneath your skin. Picture the mechanical impact compressing the microscopic crystals in your bones, sparking biological batteries that send electrical text messages to millions of sleeping builder cells.
It's quite an image.
It really is. Picture your inner ear mapping gravity, your motor cortex carving new neurological hiking trails, and your fascial network adjusting the rigging of your skeleton with every single footfall.
And just to push that perspective even further, the research leaves us with one profoundly counterintuitive reality regarding phase 4, the remodeling phase.
Oh, lay it on us.
We view remodeling as the final step of healing a broken bone, right? But the biological truth is that the remodeling cycle never actually stops.
Wait, really? Even without an injury, the construction site never shuts down?
Never. The continuous physiological turnover where osteoclasts break down old microfractured bone and osteoblasts build fresh bone in response to those piezoelectric currents you generate every day is totally relentless.
That's crazy.
Because of this continuous microscopic replacement process, the human body completely replaces its entire skeleton every 7 to 10 years.
Oh my goodness. So the bones you were walking on today are completely molecularly different from the ones you inhabited a decade ago.
Exactly.
Which means we are never just a shattered teacup sitting on a shelf waiting to dry. We are this brilliant, dynamic system, constantly using the electricity of our own movement to rebuild ourselves from the inside out.
Beautifully said.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the hidden architecture of human healing. Take a walk, charge your biological batteries, and we'll see you next time.